Dear students, the topic of the first lecture on Introduction to Chemical Technology is called Chemical Engineering. The topic plan consists of three issues, which are the historical chemical engineer, the chemical engineer today, and chemical engineering issues. Chemical engineering is the field of applied science that employs physical, chemical, and biochemical rate processes for the betterment of humanity. This is a sweeping statement, and it contains two essential concepts: rate processes and betterment of humanity. The second is straightforward, and it is at the heart of the engineering as a whole. The engineer designs processes and tangible objects that meet the real or perceived needs of the populace. According to Theodor von Karman, scientists discover the world that exists, while engineers create the world that never was. For example, civil engineers design bridges, some mechanical engineers design engines, some electrical engineers design power systems. The popular perception of the chemical engineer is someone who designs and operates processes for the production of chemicals and petrochemicals. This is a historically accurate image, but it describes only a small fraction of the chemical engineers of the early 21st century. Chemical engineers are concerned with all natural and man-made processes in which physico-chemical processes that are governed by the rates at which the physical transport of mass, momentum, and energy and the chemical and biochemical transformation of molecular species occur. The example of the fate of medication and the logical extension to devising procedures that optimize the delivery of the drug to the active site is an example of pharmacokinetics, which has been an area of chemical engineering practice since the 1960s and had led to many important advances. Chemical engineering began as a distinct profession at the start of the 20th century, although elements of what are now considered to be core chemical engineering have existed for centuries and more. For example, fermentation is mentioned in the Bible and in Homer. The discipline began as something of an amalgam, combining chemistry having an industrial focus for the mechanical design of equipment. The early triumphs which defined the profession in the public eye had to do with large-scale production of essential chemicals. For example, the invention of the fluid catalytic cracking (FCC) process by Warren Lewis and Edward Gilliland in the late 1930s was one such advance. A fluidized bed is a column in which a rising gas carries particles upward at the same average rate at which they fall under the influence of gravity, producing a particulate suspension in which the particles move about rapidly because of the turbulence of the gas stream. Crude oil conducts a granular catalyst and is converted to a variety of low molecular weight organic chemicals, for example, ethylene, propylene, etc., that can be used for feedstocks and fuel. The cracking reactions are endothermic. Residual carbon forms on the catalyst during the cracking reaction, reducing its efficiency. This carbon is removed by combustion in an interconnected reactor, and the exothermic combustion reaction produces the thermal energy necessary to carry out the endothermic cracking reactions. The process is very efficient. Its invention was crucial to the production of high-octane activation gasoline during World War II, and it is still the centerpiece of the modern petroleum refinery. Uh, as noted previously, fermentation processes have existed throughout human history. The first industrial scale fermentation process seems to have been the production of acetone and butanol through the anaerobic fermentation, a conversion discovered in 1915 by the British chemist Chaim Weizmann, who later became the first president of the State of Israel. There are lots of such examples. The chemical engineer of the first half of the 20th century was generally connected with the large-scale production of chemicals, usually through classical chemical synthesis, but sometimes through biochemical synthesis as well. The profession began to expand considerably in outlook during the second half of the century. Chemical engineers play important roles today in every industry and service profession in which chemistry or biology is a factor, including semiconductors, nanotechnology, food, agriculture, environmental control, pharmaceuticals, energy, personal care products, finance, medicine, and of course traditional chemicals and petrochemicals. More than half of the 14 grand challenges for engineering in the accompanying blog post by the United States National Academy of Engineering in 2008 require the active participation and leadership of chemical engineers. Rather than attempt to give a broad picture, we will focus on a small number of applications, areas, and key individuals. Chemical engineers have traditionally been involved in both the design of processes and the design of products, although sometimes the product cannot be separated from the process. We include chemical engineers involved with both products and processes, but the entrepreneurial nature of businesses makes it easier to single out individuals who have contributed to products. So, the 14 grand challenges for engineering, as posed by the US National Academy of Engineering in 2008, prioritized through an online survey, are the following. The first one, make solar energy economical. The second, provide energy from fusion. The third, provide access to clean water. The next ones, reverse engineer the brain, advance personalized learning, develop carbon sequestration methods, engineer the tools of scientific discovery, restore and improve urban infrastructure, advance health informatics, prevent nuclear terror, engineer better medicines, enhance virtual reality, manage the nitrogen cycle, secure cyberspace. Discussing fields of chemical engineers' occupation, we will stop on some of them. For example, production of semiconductors is driven by chemical engineers who have devised many of the processes for the manufacture of computer chips, which are dependent on chemical and trade processes. Polymer gels that release a drug over time have been investigated since the 1960s. The key issues in time release are the solubility of the drug in the gel, the uniformity of the rate of release, and of course the biocompatibility for any materials placed in the body. In 1996, the US Food and Drug Administration approved a controlled release therapy for glioblastoma multiforme, the most common form of primary brain cancer developed by chemical engineers. Other important field of chemical engineers' occupation is synthetic biology. Chemical engineers have always been involved in chemical synthesis, but the new field of synthetic biology is something quite different. Synthetic biology employs the new access to the genetic code and synthesis of DNA to create novel chemical building blocks by changing the metabolic pathways in cells, which then functions as microchemical reactors. Control of the environment, both through the development of green processes and improved methods of dealing with air and water quality, has long been of interest to chemical engineers. Chemical engineers developed the first mathematical models of air pollution in 1972. Chemical engineers attacked the problem of disposing of bauxite residue waste from the aluminum manufacturing processes, and this resolved many other environmental problems. Nanotechnology, the exploitation of processes that occur over length scales of the order of 100 nanometers or less, has been the focus of scientific interest since the early 1990s, largely driven by the discovery of carbon nanotubes and buckyballs, and the realization that clusters containing a small number of molecules can have very different physical and chemical properties from smaller quantities of the same material. One area in which nanotechnology holds great promise is the development of chemical sensors. Other chemical engineers have found a way to process carbon nanotubes to produce high-strength fibers that are electrically conductive. There are different other examples which we will discuss in our next lectures. Chemical engineers play a significant role in the synthetic polymer industry, both with regard to the development of new materials and their processing to make manufactured objects. One example that has been nicely documented in the literature is the development of a new transparent plastic, polycyclohexylethylene, for use in optical storage media. The need was for a material that could replace polycarbonate. Many technologies are based on the processing and behavior of colloidal suspensions, in which the surface chemistry and particle-to-particle interactions determine the properties. Chemical engineers have been at the forefront of the development and exploitation of colloid science in a wide range of applications. One example is work by chemical engineer is a phenomenon in which the viscosity of a suspension of colloidal particles containing permanent dipoles increases by orders of magnitude upon application of an electric field. Tissue engineering is the popular name of the field devoted to restoring or replacing organ functions, typically by conducting biocompatible scaffolding on which cells can grow and differentiate. Many chemical engineers are active in this field, which is at the intersection of chemical and mechanical engineering, polymer chemistry, cell biology, and medicine. The important role is played by chemical engineering in water desalination. Membrane processes for separation are used in a variety of applications, including hemodialysis and oxygen enrichment. One of the earliest and most significant applications was the development of the reverse osmosis process for water desalination in 1959 by chemical engineers. Chemical engineers have always been deeply involved in the development of energy sources, and with the need to move away from traditional fossil fuel, the involvement of the profession has deepened. Solar energy for electricity production is one area in which the chemical engineering role has been notable. Chemical engineers are playing an increasingly important role in modern biology and biomedicine. Chemical engineers have focused on the development of vasculature and transvascular transport in tumors, with an aim toward developing therapies. Chemical engineers has made major contributions to understanding how zeolites or molecular sieves function for separation and catalysis, and how polymers interact with surfaces. But there are a lot of questions or issues that need to be solved yet. That's why chemical engineers are actively involved in such fields as quantitative bioscience. Chemical engineers are often involved in public service. For example, chemical engineer Arnold Stanzel served on a committee that advised the US Department of the Interior on new regulations to improve the safety of offshore drilling. In this slide, you see questions. After a more deep study of the topic, you are asked to be ready to answer these questions. In order to study the topic, the material of the topic more deeply, you may use the literature listed on this slide. That's all for today. Goodbye.